The wall clock in the conference room ticked with a dry beat. 8:07 a.m. Caleb Dawn sat motionless at the head of the table, his eyes staring straight through the numbers on the projection screen. The last line was as clear as a cut $8.7 million contract, cancelled due to delays and poor quality. He said nothing. The others in the room didn't dare to speak. A heavy silence spread through the modern space of the 21st floor, Dawn Tech's headquarters in Dallas. Finally, the operations director spoke. The partner said the shipment was delivered nearly 2 weeks late. They've switched to a competitor. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Why was it late? A vice president fumbled with his documents, stammering. The Harlington plant was short-staffed. A machine was malfunctioning, but the report still deemed it favorable. Caleb planted his hands on the table, his breath constrained. Dawn Tech had once been his dream, started in a rented warehouse, with 3 circuit printers and his own grease-stained hands. He used to know the name of everyone on the assembly line. He used to personally inspect every order on weekends. And now, less than 90 miles from where he had started, some assembly line had collapsed, and he had no idea. "Bring me all the files on the Harlington plant," Caleb said softly. "Yes, sir. I'll have the internal management department." "No," he cut in, his gaze as cold as the surface of winter water. "I'll go myself." The room froze. Someone mumbled. "You mean?" Caleb stood up, as if gently shedding his CEO skin. "I mean, I'm going back to the line, not as the founder, not as Caleb Dawn, just an employee, an invisible man." That night, he sat alone in his small apartment on the 32nd floor, staring at a black-and-white photo of himself and his wife in their youth, when Dawn Tech was just an idea scribbled on the back of a napkin. Her voice echoed in his memory. "You can become the boss of thousands, but never forget what it feels like to be an employee." He closed his eyes, a long, deep breath, as if swallowing the ache in his chest. Then he stood up, opened the closet, and took out an old baseball cap, a faded brown jacket, and the pair of boots that had seen him through the coldest days of his youth. Before leaving, he whispered to himself, "I'm not going to direct. I'm going to listen. If I'm still worthy, I'll start over from the place where people are suffering the most." 6:02 a.m. The security gate of the Harlington plant closed behind Caleb, or rather, behind Elliot Dawson, the fake name he used to register through a temporary labor agency. He wore a dark brown jacket, old jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. A tag reading "Temp Worker, Elliot D." dangled from his chest. No one recognized him. In fact, no one bothered to look closely. Workers filed in silently, their eyes vacant. Some sipped coffee, others massaged a tired wrist as they walked. Inside, the factory was like an industrial orchestra, just beginning to warm up. The grumble of engines, the soft hiss of conveyor belts, the cold, stark fluorescent lights. A low voice barked from the left, "Elliot, you knew. Get a vest. Put on your ear protection and head to line 4. Matteo will show you the ropes. And don't slow people down. It was Derek, the production shift supervisor, tall, holding a clipboard, his eyes scanning everyone as if looking for faults. Elliot nodded, saying nothing. He walked over to line 4, where dozens of workers stood shoulder to shoulder, each responsible for a small part of the circuit board assembly process. You, Elliot, a man in his late 30s with a stocky build, asked without taking his eyes off his work. Yes, I'm Matteo. Give me your hand. Elliot held out his hand. Matteo quickly wrapped a protective wrist brace around it. You'll thank me by break time. Matteo taught him each step. Fasten screws. Attach the circuit. Scan the QR for inspection. Then place it on the sliding tray to be sent down the line. Everything happened with a fast-paced rhythm. There was no room for hesitation. Elliot had only been working for 10 minutes, and his wrist was already starting to go numb. But he tried not to show it. Just keep the pace. Don't let the supervisors see you pause, Matteo said under his breath, his eyes still fixed on the circuit board. Around here, you don't get fired for making a mistake, but for being slow. Elliot nodded, sweat beading on his temples. Never before had these tiny screws, things he had once designed in technical drawings, felt so heavy. At 11:59 a.m., the lunch bell rang. Elliot immediately pulled a water bottle from his backpack, but Matteo didn't move. You're not eating. Matteo shook his head. Didn't meet the quota this morning. I have to make up the time if I don't want to be here until 9 p.m. And the extra work doesn't count for pay, only if you go past 12 hours. Elliot frowned. No overtime pay. Matteo shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. Nothing here is a given. You'll see. Elliot looked around. Many others weren't leaving their stations either. They quickly shoved down sandwiches, took a gulp of water, and went back to tightening screws as if there was no lunch break at all. 1:15 p.m. The machinery suddenly slowed. A conveyor belt malfunctioned, a red light flashing. A young woman frantically checked it. That was Nina, the only person smaller than Elliot in this section. That's the second time this week. Nina, Derek's voice rang out from a distance, cold and harsh. If you slow us down again, get ready for the night shift. Nina kept her head down, her hands trembling as she adjusted the sensor. She said nothing, offered no protest, just silently wiped a tear with her sleeve. Elliot walked closer as Derek left. Are you okay? She nodded, not looking up. Just need to make it to the weekend. Elliot didn't know what else to say. A strange, painful feeling rose inside him, a simmering shame, as if he himself had built a place that made people endure rather than live. When the final bell rang at 5:00 p.m., Elliot expected everyone to rush out as if liberated. But no one left their station. Matteo pointed with his chin. Quotas not met. Keep working. The broken machine doesn't matter. Doesn't anyone object? Elliot asked quietly. No one has the right to. They lock the doors if anyone tries to leave. Elliot stood motionless. The machines roared back to life. Everyone went back to tightening screws, back to hunching over their work like repetitive shadows. And he, the man who was once the soul of the factory, was now standing in the middle of his own nightmare, and no one recognized him. 7:42 p.m. The assembly line was still running. The air in the workshop was now thick with the smell of machine oil and sweat. Elliot felt a chill run down his spine, not from the temperature, but from the feeling of being in another world, locked down by an unwritten rule, don't speak. At the end of the line, Nina bent down to pick up a dropped screw, her gloves stained with oil. A male voice drifted past Elliot's ear. One more time, and she'll actually break her arm. No joke. That'd free up a work slot. 2 other men, team leaders from the component section, snickered. Nina didn't react. No one reacted. Elliot clenched his fists, but Matteo gently pulled on his shirt. Careful. Careful of what Elliot asked quietly, his voice tight with anger. Matteo shook his head. Talk too much and you get moved to the packing area. It's much worse. No air conditioning, just dust you can't breathe through. Elliot turned to him. You mean they punish people by transferring them? No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. At 9:00 p.m., the shift finally ended. Elliot took off his gloves, his arms aching, the joints in his fingers numb. But what pained him the most was the silence. No one talked to each other, not a single laugh. Only the sound of shuffling feet, short breaths, and the clatter of metal lockers. Clarence, the elderly janitor, walked past, pulling a plastic trash bin. Do you know what's going on here? Elliot asked. Clarence looked at him, his brown eyes deep and heavy with years. Nothing is going on here, he said slowly, because no one is allowed to say that anything is. On the way home, Elliot sat alone in his car. The parking lot was empty, the fluorescent lights casting down on it like a deserted stage. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but he didn't start the engine. His eyes were fixed on the building behind him, the place where he had laid the first brick. How could I sit in a fancy office dozens of floors up, signing off on every order, without knowing that people were falling apart inside the very system I built? A soft knock on the window startled him. It was Nina. Sorry, I just wanted to return this earpiece from earlier. I saw you left it behind. Elliot took it, nodding. Nina turned to leave, then seemed to be held back by something. You just started today. Right. Yeah. Be careful. Around here, new people who ask too many questions or care about others, they usually don't last long. Elliot looked into her eyes. It wasn't a threat. It was a gentle warning from someone who had learned to protect herself with silence. That night, he sat writing notes in the small notebook he had brought. The entire line operates like a war machine. No one talks. No one dares to make a mistake. No one is allowed to feel pain. Company culture run on fear and silence. The weak aren't pushed out. They withdraw in silence. The danger doesn't come from the machinery. It comes from the fact that no one dares to speak up. Finally, he underlined one sentence I used to say: we were a company of people. But now, I don't see any people here. The next morning, When he arrived at the factory gate, Elliot stopped to look closely at the silver sign Dawn Tech, quality from True Value. He let out a bitter laugh. From True Value, or from True Silence, he bowed his head and walked in. This time, not just to observe, but to touch the wound he himself had created. The morning shift started at 6:30 a.m., but Elliot arrived nearly 20 minutes early. He stood at a distance, watching. The line of workers silently filing past the time clock placed right at the entrance. Each person scanned their card, no one saying a word. A few frowned, one stomped his foot when the machine froze, but absolutely no one complained. A few steps away was the operations office, where Derek, the shift supervisor, and two team leaders were drinking coffee and laughing. "Elliot, it's starting." Mateo's voice pulled him back to reality. While working, Elliot asked quietly, "The time clock was acting up this morning, wasn't it?" Mateo glanced over quickly. "It's always acting up, but don't report it." "Why not?" "Because if you do, they'll say it's your fault and put it in your file as obstructing progress." Elliot was surprised. "Does that really happen?" Mateo nodded. "It happened to me twice. Once for asking them to reset the machine when it wouldn't read my card. Another time for saying the clock was wrong. So, do your work hours match your paycheck?" Elliot lowered his voice. Mateo looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't indifferent. "No. We work 10 hours, the timesheet says 8. Sometimes 11 hours, it says 9.5, and if anyone asks, they get transferred to another department." That afternoon, Elliot went to the break room, a place where no one actually took a break. He sat near Selena, a middle-aged woman from the packing area. Her eyes were sunken, her hands calloused. "Have you ever tried to file a complaint?" Selena gave a hollow laugh. "I tried once. They put me on the night shift, changed my schedule every week without notice. I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks. My daughter got called into the principal's office because I couldn't pick her up. Then I withdrew the complaint. The next day, they put me back on the day shift, like it was a favor." Elliot was lost in thought. "Who manages the shifts, Trevor? He's also the one who holds the keys to the timekeeping system. Everything goes through him," she added, her voice as flat as if she were talking about the weather. "Trevor once said, 'Around here, being good at your job isn't as important as knowing your place.'" That evening, Elliot pretended to have lost his swipe card and went up to the office to ask for a new one. The young HR assistant, Jana, didn't recognize him. She asked for his ID number and looked up his file. "Your name is Elliot Dawson. Your file is here, just started." Elliot nodded. "Can I ask, if the actual work hours and the time clock hours don't match, who handles that?" Jana hesitated. "That is usually compiled by Trevor. We just receive the data at the end of the period." "Does anyone double-check it?" "No, because everything is already confirmed from downstairs." She gave a strained smile. "I just follow the chain of command. I don't want any trouble." That night, Elliot returned to his rented apartment. He didn't turn on the lights. Sitting in the darkness, he held a work schedule, a faded copy from a board in the workshop. Some names were crossed out, In a very coincidental way, Nina, Matteo, Selena, all of them had said something. He flipped the paper over and wrote, "The system is distorted by the middlemen themselves, not because they are evil, but because they are allowed to be. Every injustice begins not with malicious intent, but with accumulated silence." The next morning, Elliot went out of his way to help Clarence, the janitor, take the trash out behind the factory. Have you ever witnessed employees being forced to work off the clock? Clarence smiled sadly. I was the one who first installed the time clock here, but people quickly figured out how to manage time before managing people. Elliot nodded. Do you remember the first thing that that the founder of this company said when he installed it? Clarence looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke slowly. We don't measure people in minutes and seconds. We measure them by how they feel when they walk through the door. A shiver ran down Elliot's spine. Did anyone still feel like a person when they came in here anymore? A light rain was falling as Elliot walked out behind the workshop, where the old supply depot stood separate from the main assembly line. He followed the sound of a sweeping broom, the gentle roll of a trash cart's wheels on the wet cement. Clarence, the silver-haired man with a slightly stooped back, was wiping oil-streaked dust from the glass of the old engineering room. He wore a faded reflective vest and old mud-stained canvas shoes, but there was a strange meticulousness to his slow movements. Do you still wipe the glass by hand every day? Elliot asked, trying to keep his voice light. Clarence didn't turn around. If I don't, no one will. But this is an abandoned room, isn't it? Clarence chuckled, his voice hoarse with age. Some places, if no one maintains them, they disappear, and people will forget they ever existed. Elliot stepped closer. Inside the room was an old wooden desk, a dusty picture frame leaning to one side. He picked it up, blowing off the layer of dust. The photo was of a group of 5 men, all in white lab coats, smiling brightly in front of a large circuit board. In the middle was Clarence, but 30 years younger. What was this day? Elliot asked. The day the first batch of products went into operation. I was the chief engineer back then. And now you sweep the floors. Clarence wasn't angry, just nodded. I chose to. They offered me retirement. I asked to work part-time here. Why? Because I wanted to see if any of this factory's soul was left. He looked at Elliot, his brown eyes deep and penetrating. Do you know what kills a place like this? Not money, not old machinery. It's when no one sees decency as necessary anymore. Elliot stood in silence. He looked at Clarence's hands, calloused, his fingernails black with machine oil, yet they were still holding an old nameplate as if it were a priceless relic. You still believe in this company, Clarence answered without hesitation. I don't believe in the company. I believe in people. When they still remember that every small act leaves a mark. At that moment, a young employee named Zeke ran in, out of breath. Mr. Clarence Trevor told me to take out the trash for your shift tonight, but I don't know the route yet. Clarence wasn't rushed. Then let's walk it together. We can go slow, but remember, This even pushing a trash cart requires a certain order. Zeke nodded, then looked at Elliot. Are you new, sir? Yes, Elliot replied. I'm learning things one by one. Clarence placed a hand on Zeke's shoulder. Do you know why I wipe that glass every morning? Zeke shook his head. Because if the glass is cloudy, people forget what they're reflecting. The boy stared for a moment, then nodded slowly. Elliot stood silently, his heart pounding with an unnameable emotion. That night, in his rented room, Elliot opened Clarence's old personnel file, one that no one remembered anymore. The last line in a performance review from 15 years ago read, Clarence reliable, dedicated, and steadfast in all circumstances. He sat for a long time, then wrote in his notebook, when all other sounds have faded, the only one left preserving the company's essence is the man who sweeps the floors. And that is the sign that this company can still be saved. The next morning, Elliot returned to the factory. He stood before the glass window Clarence had wiped clean, looking at the old photo on the desk. Clarence's face was younger, but his eyes were unchanged, still the gaze of a man who knew what truly mattered. Elliot gave a slight nod. Now I understand. I never lost this company. I just lost the people in it. And if I want to get it back, I have to start with people like him. Thursday afternoon, a cold rain. The assembly line unexpectedly stopped for the second time that day. A misaligned sensor caused the system to read an error, and the entire line went dead like a body whose heart had stopped. As the workers retreated to the break area, Elliot saw Nina trying to single-handedly adjust the scanner tray, her sleeves already soaked with water. She didn't call for support. She didn't ask for help. She just kept her head down and gritted her teeth. Elliot walked over. This is heavy. Let me help. Nina looked up. Her wet hair was stuck to her cheek. She paused when she saw Elliot, the new guy, offering a hand. It's okay. I'm used to it. No one should get used to working alone in the rain, Elliot replied, his hand already supporting the sensor tray. They were silent for a few seconds. The rain fell steadily on the tin roof, like the heartbeat of a building no one was listening to. After the sensor was secured, Nina leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply. Thanks, she said softly. Elliot sat down on the concrete ledge beside her. A moment ago. I saw your hands were shaking. She nodded, not looking at him. Arthritis. My hands have been numb ever since I started working here. But I don't dare take a day off. You don't dare if someone notices. They'll replace me. There are temp workers lining up outside every day. Elliot followed her gaze to a group of young workers sitting by a cart of components, their eyes lost. So here, rest is a privilege. Nina gave a bitter smile. Here, silence is the only insurance. After a moment, Nina suddenly asked, "Have you ever worked in a place like this before?" Elliot answered slowly. "I once dreamed of a place like this, but I dreamed it would be different." She turned to look at him for the first time, as if seeing something strange in the eyes of the person across from her. You talk strangely, not like a new guy, not like a worker. Elliot smiled. Maybe because I'm old-fashioned. I came to relearn the way people really work and endure. Nina clenched her hands. We don't want to endure. We just don't know what else to do. Her eyes, in that moment, were no longer fearful, but filled with suppressed resentment, with a buried longing. Elliot said quietly, "If I asked you one thing, would you answer honestly?" "That depends on the question. If you had the power, what is the one thing you would change about this place?" Nina didn't need to think. "I would want everyone to be treated like a person, not like an assembly hand, not like a machine, just a person." Elliot fell silent. In that moment, he was no longer the man in disguise. He was a man hearing a genuine plea for help. The shift ended at 8:50 p.m. Elliot and Nina cleaned up a box of broken components together. Before she left, she looked at him, this time more clearly. "Thank you for asking. No one has ever asked me that here. For 3 years. Elliot nodded. "Thank you for answering." That night, in his notebook, Elliot wrote a single line. "People don't need a new policy. They need someone to truly see them and not look away." Then he put down his pen. He closed his eyes, but Nina's voice echoed in his head, like a wake-up call. "I just want to be treated like a person." The next morning, Elliot walked into the factory as usual, but today he walked with something different in his eyes, not just observation, not just anger, but a silent promise to a girl who was used to living in the shadows, that if anyone dared to start, he would be the first. 7:42 a.m., Friday. The sky was clear. The crisp air was a stark contrast to the previous damp. Gloomy days. The sliding glass doors of the Harlington plant opened, and every eye at the front desk seemed to be drawn to a single point. A man in a navy blue jacket, a crisp white collared shirt, and polished leather shoes walked in. No cap, no temporary employee tag, no need to ask for directions. His face no longer bore any trace of oil or dust. His skin was clean-shaven, his gaze composed but strangely cold. The receptionist dropped her paper cup when she saw him. Mr. Dawn." Caleb Dawn did not answer. He walked straight down the hallway he had neglected for years. The walls, covered in faded slogans like safety, responsibility, commitment, looked like lies exposed by time. The door to the operations office was wide open. Derek, the shift supervisor, was half reclined in his chair, scrolling through his phone, feet propped up on the desk. He didn't have time to stand up before Caleb's silhouette appeared in the doorway. "You are... Get up." Caleb's voice was calm but as sharp as a razor. Derek hastily lowered his feet, scrambling to stand. "I wasn't informed of any... No need to be informed. I didn't come to be welcomed." Caleb looked him straight in the eye. "I've been on your factory floor for 3 days. I saw you yell at a young woman trying to fix a machine. I saw you threaten the janitor for cleaning too slowly, and I saw how you distorted work hours, behaving more like a prison warden than a leader." Derek trembled. I was just following the rules." Caleb cut him off, his voice soft but carrying the weight of steel. "You were following rules that you wrote yourself. As of today, those rules are torn up." He pointed to the door. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Take your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be mailed to your home." Derek's mouth fell open, as if to protest, but the look in Caleb's eyes froze him like a statue, a look that needed no shouting, because the truth had already spoken loudly enough. Caleb walked out onto the production floor. Hundreds of pairs of eyes followed him. Nina was stunned, the scanner falling from her hand. Matteo pulled off his safety glasses as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Clarence, wiping his hands, froze mid-motion. Caleb stopped in front of Nina. "You're Nina?" "Yes, I'm Caleb Dawn." She took a step back. Did I do something wrong?" "No, but a lot of things around you have gone wrong, and I want to start by fixing that." He gave a slight nod, then turned away. Caleb pointed to the area management board. "Who is in charge of production after Derek?" A small, sturdy-looking woman stepped forward. "I am. Name's Lee." "For how long?" 6 years. Starting today. You are the acting operations manager. I want to see you on the second floor in 10 minutes. Lee frowned, but nodded. Understood. On his way back to the operations office, Caleb passed Matteo. The man stood up straight. "Is it really you?" "It's me." "So, the questions you asked me, everything you saw, I saw it, and I remember all of it." Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up. You reminded me of who I used to be." In the operations office, Caleb sat in the chair he had once considered invisible, the chair of a founder who had become too detached from reality. But this time, he didn't sit to give orders. He sat to listen. Lee walked in, her shirt stained with ink, a smudge of oil on her face. Caleb gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit, sir. I don't want anyone to have to stand while telling the truth." She sat, tentatively. "How long has this been going on here?" Lee sighed. "Too long. But people got used to it. The silent ones survived. Did you ever try to report it?" "Yes. But Greg, the previous manager, blocked everything, and I started to believe that no one up there was listening." Caleb nodded slowly. "You were right. From up so high, I forgot how to listen. But I've come down, and I'm not going anywhere." He pulled out his notebook and opened it to a blank page. "Now, tell me, what do you need to run this place without sacrificing humanity?" Lee looked at him for a long time. Then she began to speak, not with fear, but with what little hope remained. The system began to change, not with grand decisions, but with the first touch between truth and power. And Caleb understood. To save a company, you don't need a loud voice. You just need to listen to the place that has been silent the longest. The first emergency meeting began at 9:30 a.m. that day, in a room usually reserved for mid-level managers. Today, Caleb sat in the middle of the room. No podium, no slideshow, just a notebook and an old, worn-down pen. In front of him were three middle managers, Trevor, Mia, and Harlan, who'd been promoted by Derek. They sat with straight backs, their eyes a mix of anxiety and feigned calmness. Caleb began with a simple question. Among the three of you, who has edited workers' time clock entries without reporting it to HR? No one spoke. Only the soft hiss of the air conditioner felt like a cold draft through the chest. I'll ask again, and I already have proof from the system. 3 more seconds of silence. Then Mia looked down and quietly nodded. Harlan let out a soft sigh. Trevor still bit his lip, his fists clenched. Caleb wasn't angry. He just asked why Mia spoke, because we were encouraged by our superiors. If we wanted to keep the productivity numbers looking good, we had to reduce the paid hours. If not, we'd be replaced. Caleb nodded, encouraged by whom? Greg and Derek. But really, everyone knew. Just then, Lorna, the head of human resources, walked in and placed a thick file on the table. This is the list of incorrect time adjustments over the past 12 months. Total unpaid hours, 1,648. Total damages, nearly $47,000. Caleb was contemplative, not because of the number, but because those 1,648 hours were time stolen from the lives of hundreds of people, without a single apology. He turned to Lorna. I need a personnel decision for these 3. Lorna was direct. Trevor manipulated the data and directed the other shifts. Mia and Harlan followed, but also approved adjustments on their own. All of them are in violation. Caleb looked at the 3 of them. I'm not just dealing with misconduct, I'm purging a culture. Trevor, you are terminated, effective immediately. Harlan, Mia, a 2-week suspension without pay, pending further investigation. If there are signs of improvement, we will reconsider. Trevor stood up, about to say something, but looked into Caleb's eyes. He fell silent, gave a single nod, and left the room. After they left, Caleb called in Lee and Jorge. We are going to hold a direct dialogue with the entire production team. No one-way speeches, no microphones, just listening and understanding. Jorge frowned. Will they dare to speak? Caleb shook his head. They don't need to be daring. They just need to start. That afternoon, more than 60 workers were invited into the common room, a place previously used only for year-end parties and hanging awards. This time, there were no awards, no wine, just plastic chairs and a printed question on a piece of paper. If you could change one thing about this place, what would it be? The first person to stand up was Selena, the middle-aged woman Elliot had spoken with. Sir, I just want to know for sure that if my child is sick, I'm allowed to go home, not to ask for permission, just to say it. The room was silent. Then another person stood up. I want to know why I work 10 hours, but my paycheck says 8.5. Another, why do we only get a 15-minute break when we're on our feet for 4 hours straight? Caleb sat and listened to every single comment. No interruptions, no excuses. When they were done, he stood up. His voice was deep and steady, but not loud. Every person here is a part of this company. No one is allowed to be left behind. No one has to kneel to be treated like a human being. And I apologize, not on behalf of anyone else, but from myself, for not coming sooner. No one clapped, but no one bowed their heads anymore. And for Caleb, that was a more powerful change than any strategic speech he had ever written. At the end of the day, Lee and Jorge met him in the hallway. Jorge said, "There's a kid named Marcus, a warehouse employee, was ignored by Trevor when he reported a broken cabinet. I think he needs to be trusted." Caleb nodded. "Bring him to see me tomorrow morning." Lee looked at him. "You're doing something I thought no one would ever do here." Caleb smiled wearily. "I'm not doing anything new. I'm just listening to what has been ignored for too long." 7:05 a.m. Monday. A brand new whiteboard was hung at the entrance of the Harlington plant. The words were handwritten in blue marker. "Welcome to a work day where breaks are a right, not a reward." Below it was a new announcement: 2-hour shift rotations to prevent repetitive strain injuries. 30-minute official break, effective this week. All work hours will be publicly displayed with employee access for verification. Clarence walked by, read it, and nodded. Finally, someone remembers that workers aren't machines that need their screws tightened. In the HR office, Caleb met with Marcus, the young man from the warehouse. The boy arrived with a look of confusion on his face. "Am I going to be reprimanded? For what for?" "Submitting a report about the broken cabinet on my own." But Trevor never responded. Caleb interrupted him. "You were ignored. Not wrong. You need to be heard." He pulled an offer letter from his pocket. "I want you to transfer to report directly to the purchasing department. Start by conducting a full inventory of the warehouse over the next 7 days. After that, we will redesign the storage system together." Marcus was stunned. I studied logistics in community college, but I dropped out." Caleb nodded. "Now is the time to apply what you never thought you'd get a chance to use." At the same time, Lee, now the acting manager, was organizing a new assembly line meeting based on a rotating team model. Jorge was appointed to be in charge of internal improvements. The two of them repositioned the scanners and adjusted the workbenches to better suit the workers' heights. A small experiment, moving a barcode machine 20 centimeters closer, reduced processing time by 9%. No one thought it was a big change, but Caleb looked at the productivity chart and smiled. Every big change starts with a little less shoulder pain. The break room was also repainted. A small suggestion board appeared, with a pen attached. The first line written on it said, "If you have something you want to share, it doesn't have to be a problem. Just something real. Write it down." Someone wrote, "I'd like to listen to soft music during breaks." 3 days later, a soft jazz playlist was playing on the speakers. No one knew who turned it on, but everyone was listening. HR conducted a full review of all personnel files. Those who had been written up for family-related reasons, like Nina, had their records cleared and their benefits fully restored. Caleb called Nina into his office. "You once said, I just want to be treated like a person. Yes. So what if I told you I want to invite you to be our internal community advisor, to design an anonymous feedback system? What would you think? Nina was surprised. I've never managed anyone. That's why I chose you. People who know how to listen don't need to learn how to command. They just need to remember what it felt like to be ignored, so they don't repeat it with anyone else. At the end of the week, Caleb met with the entire supervisory team. There was no PowerPoint, just a small piece of paper. 3 principles for all decisions from now on. Does it hurt anyone? Does it maintain fairness? Does it make someone want to walk into this factory tomorrow morning? Someone asked. What about profit targets? Caleb replied. Profit is the result. Integrity is the foundation. And I would rather build a company on trust than a castle on fear. That evening, Caleb walked past the machine room. Clarence was standing there, wiping a doorknob. Now you're starting to get it, he said with a smile. Get what being a boss isn't about control. It's about creating an environment where other people don't have to fend for themselves alone. Caleb nodded. Thank you for not leaving, even when everyone else had quietly run away. Clarence replied softly, I didn't stay for the company. I stayed because I still believed someone would come back. Caleb looked around. The light in the workshop was no longer harsh. It was warmer, softer, and people had started talking again. Tuesday, 10:00 a.m. In the middle of the once dusty warehouse, a new wooden table was placed by the window. On the table was a new layout diagram for the entire storage area. Beside it, Marcus, the once overlooked warehouse employee, was pointing out each section of the diagram to 2 of his colleagues. The barcode scanner moves down here. It cuts retrieval time in half. An older worker smacked his lips. If this works, I won't have to climb on a stool 20 times a day. Marcus smiled, blushing slightly. I hope so. A new sign hung in the administration office, Internal Improvement Team. A new interface from the same old people. The first 3 names listed were Lee, Jorge, and Nina. Jorge, once an assembly line worker, was now the operations improvement assistant. He walked through each line, noting problems, taking notes in a small notebook, no computer needed. Because, as he said, if you can't write it down by hand, it's hard to do it with your head. Nina, in her role as culture coordinator, began organizing 15-minute sharing sessions at the end of each shift. No pressure, no microphone, just a circle where people could share. I'm tired today. My kid is sick, but I still came in. I'm thankful someone helped me switch shifts. At first, only 5 people attended. A week later, the break room was full. On Thursday afternoon, Caleb sat in the back of the observation room, where Marcus was presenting to the purchasing team. Here's the inventory data. 32% of our stock is from orders that weren't rotated properly. I propose we separate the warehouse based on in-out frequency. The head of purchasing nodded. Where did you study logistics? Marcus smiled. The school of life. But I'm reapplying to college. The boss said it's never too late to learn what you once left behind. In the engineering section, Jorge was teaching a young worker how to check the pressure on the cutting machine. The boy asked, "Where did you learn all this stuff?" Jorge replied, "Without thinking, from the very day I was told I was only good for tightening screws. I learned so I would never have to bow my head to anyone who saw me as a tool." In the HR office, Nina opened the new suggestion box. It had her name on it. Among the many slips of paper was a single line. "Thank you for listening. I used to think there was no point in speaking up. Now I believe someone is actually listening." She folded the paper and held it gently to her chest, like an invisible medal that no job title could ever bestow. That afternoon, Caleb invited the entire improvement team to lunch. No dress code, no business cards, just people who had once suffered in silence, now sitting together to shape how everyone would work better. Caleb raised his glass of water and said softly, "Thank you all for stepping up, not because you wanted to stand out, but because you no longer wanted to be silent." Jorge nodded. "We never thought we were the kind of people who could change anything." Nina added, "But when you asked and really listened, we didn't feel so small anymore." When the group left, Caleb stayed behind, alone. He looked out at the back courtyard, where sunlight streamed through the iron fence, casting shadows on the once cold cement floor. He opened his notebook and wrote a line, "I used to think change came from the people at the top. But it turns out, change begins with the person at the end of the line, when they get a chance to step forward." Monday morning, Caleb was at Dawn Tech headquarters for the first time in 3 weeks. The office staff was surprised, even confused, to see him appear without fanfare, without an assistant, without a private driver. In the elevator up to the 20th floor, he ran into a young employee. "Mr. Dawn." "Hello, sir. Are you just back from a branch visit?" Caleb smiled. "No, I'm just back from reality." "And you? Have you ever left your Excel spreadsheets?" The young man blushed but nodded. "I understand, sir. The executive boardroom." Caleb stood at the head of the table, but he wasn't holding a laser pointer. In front of him was a 10-page plan, but it was summarized by a single handwritten sentence. "We cannot manage a company without understanding the people who are keeping it alive." The room was silent. He began. "For the past 3 weeks, I haven't written an email. I haven't signed a decision. I haven't sat in an air-conditioned room. I was at a factory, undercover, and I saw where our company is rotting from detachment." A finance director spoke up. "So, what do you plan to do?" Caleb nodded. "Not do what, but hear what. We are launching the listening tour, a comprehensive listening journey. Every quarter, I and every single one of you will spend at least 2 days at a branch, unannounced, no special treatment, just listening." A few people frowned. One asked, "Do we need a specific policy for that?" Caleb smiled. "The first policy is, don't say anything. Just go and listen with all the silence you've ever ignored." The following week, at Harlington, the changes continued. A formal mentoring program began. Marcus was mentored by Jorge every morning. Nina organized one-on-one talks between departments that had never spoken before. Lorna, the head of HR, established an anonymous evaluation system where no one had to sign their name to be protected. A new slogan appeared on the bulletin board: "We don't fix people, we fix the way we treat them." On Friday afternoon, Caleb called the Prescott plant, the next place he was going. He didn't notify anyone. He just scheduled a work assignment as a temporary employee. Clarence heard the news and just said quietly, "You're not stopping, are you?" Caleb replied, "When you know there's a right thing to do, you don't stop. You just change your position to start over." Before leaving Harlington, Caleb walked through the factory one last time in his role as an outsider. He saw Jorge adjusting a machine with a new technician. Marcus was pushing a cart through the hall with his improved layout diagram attached to the side. Nina was sitting and talking with a young female worker who was both crying and laughing. People didn't need to see him to know he was there, because for the first time his presence was no longer a shadow of power, but a guarantee of what was right. As he reached the gate, Lee caught up with him. "You're not going to say goodbye," Caleb replied, his eyes still on the road ahead. "No need to say goodbye, because I'll be back. Or if I'm not, the people who are left know how to keep this place from breaking again." Lee smiled. "They're not waiting for orders anymore. They're doing it themselves." Caleb stopped and looked at her. "And that's when I know I don't need to be a CEO anymore. I just need to be the first person who chooses to do the right thing so that others have the courage to continue." One quiet Sunday afternoon, Caleb parked his car in front of an old red-brick building tucked away in a gradually forgotten industrial neighborhood. There was no sign, no grand gate, just a rusty, crooked iron plaque on the wall: "Dawn Workshop, established 1998. This was where it all began: a rented garage, 3 second-hand circuit cutters, and an old wooden desk he had built with his own hands. Caleb walked in without turning on the lights. The late afternoon sun shone through the dusty glass, casting shadows on the cracked cement floor. The left corner still had an oil stain from a minor circuit printer fire. The right corner, "We're nervous." Caleb replied, "If you weren't nervous, it wouldn't be you. But if you still step up, then you're already someone else, the person you dared to become." Marcus sent back a smiling emoji and added another line: "Thanks for not giving up on us halfway." Caleb typed back, succinctly, "You are the reason I came back." One Monday morning at the Glendale plant, a branch once rated as the most stable in the system, Caleb walked in without an announcement, without a meeting, without a secretary. He brought just one thing with him: a small folding chair. He placed the chair in the middle of the employee cafeteria, sat down, and hung a handwritten sign in front of him: "I'm here to listen. If you need 3 minutes, I have all day." At first, no one dared to approach. But at the 12-minute mark, a female employee named Rosa, who worked in packing, walked over and sat down. She talked about having her shift changed 3 times in 1 week due to a reactive schedule. Caleb only asked, "Where do you feel the most tired? Your head, your shoulders, or your trust?" Rosa looked up. For the first time in 3 years, she cried. without shame. By lunchtime, the chair was never empty. A line of people formed, not to complain, but to exist through their own stories. A young engineer talked about almost quitting after being yelled at by his manager in front of everyone. A maintenance worker said he had found a machine error long ago, but no one had read his report. A woman in her late 40s just said, "I just want to know if anyone still remembers my name." Caleb nodded, then repeated every name he had written down, not a single one wrong, not one missing. The room fell silent, but this silence was different. It was no longer fear. It was respect for the man who was willing to sit quietly without interrupting. A few days later, a photo appeared on Dawn Tech's internal network. Caleb, the founder, sitting in a plastic folding chair, next to a handwritten sign, "No suit, no slides, just a man with ears to listen and a heart to understand." Below the photo, a hashtag spread quickly through all the factories. "Start with a chair." That night, in his office, Caleb reopened a letter from his late wife, his partner who had passed away from illness years ago. There was a passage in the letter, "You will be successful. But if one day you feel like you're running something so big," that Caleb walked in without an announcement, without a meeting, without a secretary. He brought just one thing with him, a small folding chair. He placed the chair in the middle of the employee cafeteria, sat down, and hung a handwritten sign in front of him. "I'm here to listen. If you need 3 minutes, I have all day." At first, no one dared to approach. But at the 12-minute mark, a female employee named Rosa, who worked in packing, walked over and sat down. She talked about having her shift changed 3 times in 1 week due to a reactive schedule. Caleb only asked, "Where do you feel the most tired? Your head, your shoulders, or your trust?" Rosa looked up. For the first time in 3 years, she cried, without shame. By lunchtime, the chair was never empty. A line of people formed, not to complain, but to exist through their own stories. A young engineer talked about almost quitting after being yelled at by his manager in front of everyone. A maintenance worker said he had found a machine error long ago, but no one had read his report. A woman in her late 40s just said, "I just want to know if anyone still remembers my name." Caleb nodded, then repeated every name he had written down, not a single one wrong, not one missing. The room fell silent, but this silence was different. It was no longer fear. It was respect for the man who was willing to sit quietly without interrupting. A few days later, a photo appeared on Dawn Tech's internal network. Caleb, the founder, sitting in a plastic folding chair, next to a handwritten sign, "No suit, no slides, just a man with ears to listen and a heart to understand." Below the photo, a hashtag spread quickly through all the factories, and "Start with a chair." That night, in his office, Caleb reopened a letter from his late wife, his partner who had passed away from illness years ago. In the letter was a passage, "You will be successful. But if one day you feel you're running something so big that you don't know how the smallest person feels, then go back and ask, All it takes is one person asking, for another to dare to answer. Caleb softly closed his eyes. A smile appeared on his lips. Not a bright one, but a deep one, like an ending that needed no applause. At Harlington, Jorge was walking Marcus through an inspection of the inventory flow system. Nina was standing by the bulletin board, holding a suggestion slip from a new worker. For the first time, they had written, "I want to stay, because here, I don't have to pretend I'm okay." And Clarence was still sweeping the floors, but now, whenever someone walked past, they would nod a greeting, no longer seeing him as an old-timer, but as the keeper of the most vivid memories.